All right. Next slide, please. Our next speaker is Josh Posamentier, a fellow Piedmont father and sustainable energy investor. He works at Congruent Ventures and has been significantly involved in creating the plans for solar panels on the steam building. I will now hand it over to Josh.
Great. Not sure if you can see me. I still see Luke. Ah, there we are. Great. Nice to see everyone. So Josh Posamentier, Congruent Ventures. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of the context here, specifically why we're asking today, and some of the history. So I've been involved a little bit, not so much in the design, but sort of effectively on the financing side, as the solar system, at least on the roof, the flat roof, and the other parts of the roof were cost engineered out early on, and we were trying to see how we could afford to keep those in scope, and that's part of the conversation here. So if you want to switch to the next slide. So this is the steam building as it sort of stands today, more or less. You see there are actually, I can't actually see them, but there are actually some solar panels on this project already on the canopies at ground level, providing some shade, and on some awnings over windows as well to provide shade and a little bit of energy. The ones that are out of scope, if you flip to the next slide, well, we'll see that in a second. We'll talk about the ones on the roof that are out of scope. So briefly, to kind of second some of the points that we heard earlier, the steam building is actually, of course, connected to PG&E via smart meter, and part of what's called net metering is where we actually produce more energy in the summer that we'll likely use. We get credit for that in the winter and vice versa. So this is it's a lot less expensive than, say, installing a bunch of batteries on site. It's a little less flexible, it's less capable, but at the end of the day, it's definitely the more cost-effective way, basically, to use the grid as a giant battery. And so over time, California's commercial and residential rates have been rising pretty consistently, especially with respect to the rest of the country. And the expectation is that will continue out into the future. And so installing solar panels today that are in the money, they're more cost effective than buying energy from the grid, even at the sort of more expensive cost structure that we incur by having them on the roof of a school. They still are cheaper than buying energy from PG&E today. And that means they are going to be much cheaper than buying energy from PG&E in the future. So they're actually worth more over time in some ways. So if you flip to the next slide. So this is a simulation of the roof of the steam building. The color coding is basically how much solar energy each facet of the roof absorbs. So you can see the angled part of the roof, the south and west facing angled parts of the roof absorb more energy and have more solar potential, but even the flat parts have pretty good solar potential as long as you stay away from the shady areas around the edges. So this just tells us basically it's a relatively good environment for solar panels, as opposed to, say, a very peaky faceted roof under a lot of trees or something. So it's a good place to put solar panels, even if a little bit expensive, and I'll get to that in a second. So if you flip to the next, there we go. So this is a sort of a three-dimensional rendering. All of those panels, I can't show you with a mouse, but all the panels on the side and on sort of the bottom near the ground, those are all in scope. So those have already been those are already part of the project, and I believe either installed or being installed. The ones we're talking about are the ones on the angled part of the roof and on the flat part of the roof. And then next to the steam building, you see the theater building, and that's a whole separate project, but that also has a significant amount of solar. So these two buildings were designed to be together, to be net zero energy. So they'll produce roughly the annual amount of energy necessary to power them, even if it's offset in seasons. So more in the summer, less in the winter, but it'll average out roughly break even. So again, it's potentially more of an educational opportunity than anything else, but it is actually a cost savings, and I'll get to that shortly. So if you want to flip the slide to the next slide. So this is a top-down view. You can get a sense of how many panels there are. There are 305, if I can add those together, panels between the angled parts of the roof, the sloped roof and the flat roof. And together, those total comes out to about 400,000. So this includes, at least for the sloped roof, just the panels. The rest of the infrastructure was there. But for the flat roof, it includes all of the power electronics and the conduits and the racking and the installation. Actually, in the sloped roof, it includes the installation as well. So those things are actually more expensive than the panels themselves. So again, we'll see that in a second. So if you want to flip to the next slide, we'll get into some of the details. So these are top tier LG panels. So they're, tier one panels are known to be, usually manufactured by a very reputable, bankable company. LG is a huge multinational conglomerate. These are very efficient panels, so we get a lot of bang for our buck in terms of coverage. And on average, amortized across all the electronics and the installation and the racking and everything else, they're about $1,300 a piece with everything included, which comes out to about $350 a watt. And that is definitely more expensive than the average, California installed rooftop price of about $294 a watt. But part of that comes from the fact that it's a school subject to a lot of the, rigorous requirements that the state puts on California schools, and the fact that it's on the top of a pretty tall building and they need to crane up panels and, have people in safety harnesses and all of that stuff. So everything conspires to make it more expensive. Fortunately, for each panel, like each one of these 305 panels is going to generate about half a megawatt hour a year. So average house in Piedmont is probably somewhere between half a megawatt and a megawatt hour a month. We have relatively large houses and they're relatively old stock. And so, that's to give you a sense of what a single panel can do over the course of a year. Each panel, though, over its lifetime, say a 25-year expected life, and they'll actually probably last longer than that, will generate about $3,700 of energy, assuming typical PG&E rate increases year on year, and the output of a panel will fall slightly over the years, but generally it'll maintain roughly that kind of output. So that's a huge savings for the district. Over the 305 panels and over the 25 years they'll be out there producing energy, that saves about 1.2 million in energy costs over the years, which is huge. I mean, that's literally, those are dollars we do not have to pay PG&E. So for every dollar that you donate now, you're recovering, you're saving the district considerable money over time. So that's unusual for a donation. Usually a donation's, I give $1, it's spent on something that's great. Here you give $1 and it's actually amplified significantly because it's got good ROI over time. So I think I'll wrap with that, and I think we'll take some questions and conversations later. But thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Josh. That was magnificent. Amazing.